drives me to the edge and takes away my breath. I'm insignificance of a giant wasteland, emptiness of essence in a twilight of regret. When the lights go out and the time will state, long live insanity that makes us all forget. I'll wait for her in darkness as for my last resort, for angel-like appearance of the deceitful thought. Forgive the one who's dreaming and jumps into a divide and screams of disagreement from someone trapped inside. Think about fate, measurable strength drives me to the edge, takes away
Yes, we have just listened to a performance by Maya Friedman. Multi-talent, as you probably understood. Musician, mostly cellist. Born in Moscow, now residing in the Netherlands. I think we're very lucky that you opened it in such a wonderful, wonderful way this evening. Thank you very much. Since the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, Maya Friedman organized many, many benefit concerts together with Russians and Ukrainians raising money for Ukraine, which I think is also very, Now, we need to get above this after this start. And it's very, very, very beautiful. Thank you. Welcome to the Bali tonight. My name is Juri Albrecht. I'm director of the Bali, and I will try to be the moderator tonight. This is the opening event of our annual Free Thinkers Festival, and actually second Free Thinkers Festival. We organize it together with Amsterdam 750 jaar, 750 years, and we're very happy of the collaboration of the municipality who makes this also possible, and we're very happy that we can collaborate with them, and tonight, especially tonight, with PEN Nederland, the important organization who watches over the freedom of writers, and we're lucky enough that we have Maxim Osipov here, who is an honorable member of the PEN Netherlands, and we will listen to him later tonight. I would say maybe the biggest writer in Russian language living today. This is the opening event, like I said. Free thinking, speaking truth to power, you could also say. It says tegen de macht. Well, I'd like to translate that into speaking truth to power. And tonight we have a program with many artists, journalists, artists, writers, theater directors from Russia. And I think how better to start a weekend, 4 days of festival of speaking truth to power with speaking to Russians. When earlier this year, the Russians massively invaded, of course they invaded earlier Ukraine, but massively invaded Ukraine, I heard a lot of people saying that, okay, we scrapped Tolstoy, we're not going to do any Tchaikovsky. And we had the opposite reaction. It's very important now to take an example, I would say, of the Russian intellectuals and Russian culture, which has been, very used to living under circumstances we cannot even imagine. So I'm very, very touched and grateful that there are a few Russians here tonight who want to share their experiences with us. And I do believe, and I cannot fathom the depth of their pain, but I do believe it's very, very important to listen to that, what happened to people in Russia. So I'm very, very proud, actually, that these people are willing to speak with us. I'm very happy that you're here. I will introduce them later to you, because now I'm very, very happy that we have the mayor of Amsterdam here, who did an introduction of the first festival celebrating dissent we had in 2019, but then we had a pandemic, and that was the first one. So we have the second one tonight, opening night tonight. So I'd like to invite Femke Halsema, the mayor of Amsterdam, to take the floor and open officially this.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A quote. If you are afraid of the darkness will devour you. But if you stare at the darkness and you open your eyes as widely as you can, you will defeat the darkness. Those of you who were here last year might remember the Iranian feminist Masih Alinejad quoting her mother. When Masih was growing up in a small and poor Iranian village, the toilet was located in an outhouse. There was no electricity, thus there was no light. Masih was afraid to go through the pitch-dark garden at night until her mother taught her this lesson. Open our eyes as widely as you can. Perhaps this is the secret of her to the courage of free thinkers and dissidents all over the world. And we have seen such courage recently on the streets of Tehran, of Moscow, and on the front lines of Ukraine. We see it in the theaters, on the internet, in newspapers, and in books. And that is why, as Yuri mentioned, it is wonderful that the Dutch chapter of the International Writers' Organization, PEN, is involved in tonight's evening also. Since last year's Festival of Freethinkers, the world tragically has become less free. Putin has made the world less free with his barbaric invasion of Ukraine and his oppression of the last remnants of freedom in Russia. The Ayatollah has made the world less free with the murder of Mahsa Amini and his hopefully failing attempts to crush the women-led revolution in Iran. These events have made the headlines recently, but we know how much more repression goes on in other places. In camps and prisons, Uyghur people continue to be tortured. In Hong Kong, publishers of children's books have been convicted. In many dictatorships, even uttering the word freedom is considered a crime. And there is no reason for democratic countries to be triumphant or complacent about our freedoms here. In many countries, including the Netherlands, journalists are increasingly harassed online and in person. We have seen in different parts of the world that democracy can't be taken for granted, as we all know. Meddling in elections or denying their results, dismantling free and independent courts, military coups, these are never the first steps to end freedom. The first attacks are always directed at the parts of society the autocrats believe to be vulnerable, at women, their right to choose, their right not to be arrested and not to be humiliated, and at journalists who uncover truth and expose tyranny. We all know the name Mahsa Amini, but let's also not forget the name of Nilofer Hamedi, the journalist that broke the story of Amini's murder and who was arrested and jailed. The first attacks are quite often directed at the arts and literature as well. Moscow's Gogol Theatre being closed, bookshop keepers and even publishers of children's books being prosecuted in Hong Kong, writers being labeled as foreign agents. Sometimes attacks on literature and more subtle, like suggesting writers are elitist and enemies of the people. We should cherish books, like the household Salman Rushdie grew up in. And he remembers it like this. Devout households in India often contained and still contain persons in the habit of kissing holy books. But we kissed everything. And we kissed dictionaries and atlases. We kissed Enid Blyton novels and Superman comics. If I'd ever dropped a telephone directory, I'd probably have kissed it too. And all this happened before I had ever kissed a girl. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to the second Freethinkers Festival of Amsterdam. It's based on the idea of the Festival of Dissent that the Bali organized in 2019. And the call to action of the Amsterdam City Council to spread the ideal of freedom of expression and freedom of religion. As mentioned, it has only become more important that we have such a festival And I hope it can grow even bigger over the years leading up to 2025, when Amsterdam celebrates its 750th birthday. This festival is a platform for dissidents to be heard, a podium, as Yuri said, to speak truth to power. And also, I must admit, a great opportunity for Amsterdam and its inhabitants to host some of the most brilliant people from all over the world. After last year's attention to the freedom of thought and religion, this year's theme is against power, speaking truth to power. And I am honored to share the stage tonight with courageous individuals from Russia. It's heartbreaking to witness a whole generation of Russian people forced to leave their country by cynical dictatorship just because they write books, direct theater and opera, and tell the truth. Like Maxim Osipov has described in such a touching manner, many people feel ashamed after leaving their country. And I want to say to our guests that they have every reason to be proud, because they, each in their own way, stand up against power, for truth, for humanity, and for freedom. Just like the speakers and artists that we will see and hear the coming day, whether they are from Russia, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, Iran, or the Netherlands. They all inspire us to keep our eyes wide open and defeat the darkness. Thank you, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much, Mayor of Amsterdam, Femke Halsema. Indeed, Hong Kong, Iran, and Amsterdam, we have speakers from all those places in the next 4 days. So do come back, but also very happy that you're here, because tonight we're having a wonderful conversation, a very important conversation on speaking truth to power in Russia. Thank you very much again. And yes, it's true. The world has become much more dictatorial in a little bit over 2 years' time, the last time we were here with Masih Alinejad. On the other hand, it has become more important to talk about free thinking and free speech, and I think I have to say that Amsterdam is doing its part. Recently, I think Bellingcat, OCCRP, the Moscow Times, and Medusa came partly or entirely to Amsterdam because it's a free city where you obviously can live as a dissident journalist. Thank you for that as well, for this, for that sort of policy. Now I'd like to introduce to you, his name has been mentioned already a few times tonight, Maxim Osipov, and a warm welcome to you. Writer, I already said, probably one of the most important writers in the Russian language today. Cardiologist, forced to leave Russia after he criticized the war in Ukraine, and he's now here in the Netherlands to teach at Leiden University as a writer in residence, Russian literature and the political situation in Russia. And Osipov is, like I said, an honorary member of the PEN in the Netherlands. Very warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I prepared a speech that I was told to prepare 2,000 words, so I will read this 2,000-word speech. It is my great honor to address you today, but along with gratefulness for being invited to this wonderful place, I am feeling other emotions, a mixture of timidity and surprise. I am neither a dissident nor, in fact, even political activist. I'm a Russian writer, Until recently, I was also a practicing physician, a cardiologist, a founder of a small but still functioning charity fund, and before that, a medical publisher, an author, and an editor of numerous scientific books. Throughout my professional life, I, like many of my friends, tried to say and do simple things that make sense, as Tolstoy beautifully said about one of his female characters. Some things were working for us, some weren't. But in the end, we found out that we had lost, historically and spiritually, and many of us had to immigrate, to flee the country where we were born, grew up, raised our children, lived to see our grandchildren born, and began to grow old, to leave behind our homes and friends and the graves of our parents. We hate war, hate the one who unleashed it, but we also weren't planning to abandon our homeland, motherland, fatherland, every word, whichever you choose, starting with whichever letter, capital or lowercase, feels dirty, dishonored. Some say that when you lose, you learn your true worth. Soon we will learn, because that's what we are, losers. Some of us left in order to avoid political persecution, some out of disgust, suffocation, unwillingness to live in a totalitarian state. Would you let your children and grandchildren line up in Z formation? No, absolutely not. Saying goodbye to our homes and possessions was easy. It is inappropriate to grow sentimental when Russian bombs are falling on Kharkov and Kiev, Dnipro and Lviv. However, we don't exactly feel we've done well for ourselves. Signing petitions, composing anti-war letters, attending protest demonstrations, clearly that was not enough. Let me briefly recall the course of events that led to this situation. I'd like to begin with a kind of confession. In the course of my life, I made two big political mistakes, at least two that I am aware of. In 1996, when Yeltsin was running against the communist Zyuganov for the presidency of Russia, I so badly wanted Yeltsin to win that I openly told everyone I knew that, had I the opportunity to tamper with the final tally, I would without hesitation add millions of votes for Yeltsin in order to prevent the communists from taking control of my country again. Now, when I hear about violations of every sort during elections in Russia, I always remember what I myself asked for 25 years ago. The second mistake happened in 2000. This was the year when that Putin came to power. The elections took place in March, and in January, tragedy struck my own family. My sister, her husband, and her 11-year-old son were killed by two men who broke into their apartment to rob them. At the time of the elections, the murderers had yet to be caught. My only desire at that time was to have them arrested, and looking at the poor state of Russian police, I repeatedly said that I wanted to have a so-called strong hand in power, that I wanted to live in a society where everything was under control. In other words, I wanted to live in a police state. Now both of my wishes have been fulfilled. We have fake elections, and we live in a police state. Everything became clear very quickly. You may remember Putin's answer to a question posed by Larry King. What happened with the submarine Kursk? It sank, said Putin, and smiled. It happened in August 2000. The last thing I saw while leaving Moscow was a billboard, "We are not ashamed," something unbelievable, unimaginable, totally different from true Russian culture and spirit, and we understood them. We were not aware at that time about the thousands of war crimes Russian army was about to commit in Ukraine. So this slogan and Putin's disgusting smile are the most expressive symbols of his ruling our country for the last 22 years. Think of the horrors that utterly mediocre person has brought to tens of millions of people, to Ukrainians first and foremost. But think of the damage he has done to Russians too, in some cases ruining their minds, and in others, like ours, their entire lives. Being an emigre is not a merit, and to stay in a country that can rightly be called fascist and to keep a low profile is no merit either. I'd like to exploit a metaphor suggested by a good friend of mine. Imagine that you are sitting in a train and a gang of thugs, hooligans, enters your car and starts terrorizing the passengers. One group of people moves to another car. A bigger group stays with their eyes down, pretending not to see the atrocities going on around them. From the ethical point of view, these two groups are in a similar position. But there is a very small number of people who are trying to fight off the bullies, even if this fight is doomed to fail. Those people, rather than me, deserve to represent Russia here and elsewhere. They are unable to crush Putin's regime, but they try to save the nation's honor. These people deserve to be named, each of them, but I will mention just a few. Alexei Gorinov, Ilya Yashin, Vladimir Karamurza, Yevgeny Roizman, Yuri Dmitriev, and of course the first name to be mentioned is Alexei Navalny. Therefore, I would like to devote a large part of my speech to him. Let me cite some quotes from an essay on this exceptionally brave man that I wrote in April 2021. On January 13, 2021, when I learned that Alexei Navalny intended to return to Moscow, I posted the following on my Facebook page. Once at the circus, I saw a high-wire act. The orchestra fell silent, and the audience did too. High up above our heads, a teenage boy was making his way along a nearly invisible tightrope. I was so afraid for him that I grew dizzy. And then a child's voice burst through the silence. Good boy, hold on. Today's news inspired the same sense of dizziness, as well as the urge to shout like that child. In those January days, our admiration for Navalny, who had only recently, miraculously, recovered from poisoning, overweighed our fear for him. He knew what he was doing, or so it seemed. We compared him to Napoleon on the bridge of Arcole, to Ivan the Lucky Fool of Russian fairy tales, even to Pushkin's Pretender. Providence watches him, of course. Simply put, we saw him as a chosen man, a person endowed with a sense of destiny. This feeling was only intensified when, upon arriving at Sheremetyevo Airport, Navalny selected the ideal background, a wall-size photograph depicting the towers and domes of the Kremlin, for an interview, his final interview while still at liberty. Why won't the judge show herself? What is she, naked? Navalny asked in court. Imagine the presence of mind it takes to joke under those circumstances. And then his final exclamation, Russia will be happy, a cheerful phrase in place of the far darker, albeit accurate slogans of previous years. Heroism as a gift, as a form of genius that cannot be faked or imitated. This is what elicits such admiration from one segment of the population and such envy from another. Now the cheerfulness has evaporated, ceding way to profound despair. Navalny is in prison, being tortured with sleep deprivation, refused medical assistance. Every day brings darker, more depressing news. The political world has turned black and white. It's pointless to reason in terms of right versus left, parliamentary versus presidential republic, nation-state versus federation. The nature of the conflict is plain as day. Life versus its absence. Light versus darkness. Society has been plunged into a state of moral catastrophe, of impotence. Neither immersion in our work, nor retreat into our private lives, nor immigration can save us. Sure, there is your small circle of friends. There is Facebook, which has taken the place of real social institutions and fostered the illusion that we are among our own kind. But take a closer look, and you see Russian life shrinking, growing faint. First one, then another decides to leave. But how will that help Navalny and hundreds, if not thousands, of political prisoners? No. Even if you leave, even if you distance yourself from the tragedy, you won't stop watching it. We've got to do something. Well, we lived throughout the Soviet era. What does the Soviet era have to do with this? It's going to draw comparison. Then let's, if you are going to draw comparison, then let's talk about Germany in the mid-30s. There are the conversations that make up the whole of Russian life. I'd like to end on a consoling, if not entirely optimistic note, but where can I find one? All I can do is to repeat what I started with, but quietly under my breath. Good man, hold on, just think, maybe he'll make it. So that was what I wrote a year and a half ago. Since then, Navalny has received a new, very long term of imprisonment for something he is obviously not guilty of. The conditions of his detention has become even more unbearable, and he has been joined by new victims of the regime, a few of whom I mentioned earlier. The comparison of my home country to Germany in the mid-30s was even more accurate than we thought then. Although then, and perhaps even long before, Russian society was internally prepared for a catastrophe, each generation of Russians experienced its own catastrophe. That is an answer to the question of why many of us seemed to take it easy. We can say that Russia has not survived the 20th century, which can be proven even statistically. At the beginning, citizens of the Russian Empire made up to 10% of world population. Now the proportion equals less than 2%. And the war that Russia wages against independent Ukraine will only accelerate Russia's degradation and disintegration. Wishing defeat on the country where I was born and grew up is hard, but the alternative is much scarier. There is one thing, however, that gives me confidence in Ukraine's ultimate victory. Watching the official Russian TV channels, one can observe a diminishing sense of righteousness about the war. There is hysteria, but no sense of right, of entitlement. In Russian language, the word right, pravata, has the same root as the words truth, pravda, law, prava, and righteous, pravednik. Without a sense of rightness, even a false one, the war cannot be won. That is for sure. Finally, I would like to speak about what I was asked in the first place. How do I see the role of the Russian writer, the artist, in the current situation? I think the key word here is humility. It is not our stories or speeches that determine the fate of the world, but the courage of the Ukrainian people and its president, their fighting spirit, and of course the readiness of Western countries to render military and economic aid. Moreover, the sense of national shame, disgrace experienced by each of us can hardly encourage us to make great artistic discoveries. As for the so-called cancellation of Russian culture, it is quite obvious that that is not happening in Europe, but mainly in Russia itself, where theaters are closed, the freedom of speech, freedom of the press these days is severely restricted. This process started not now, but long ago. Here is what I wrote in 2017. You just don't know the whole truth. You've heard that said countless times by anti-European Russians in Paris, in Rome. That's all they talk about. People don't like us here, don't like us there. My friends, you know where they like us least of all? In Moscow, at home. As for the fact that these days someone in Poland or the Baltic states is not dancing the Nutcracker or is not staging Boris Godunov, we cannot do much about it. The criminal gang that seized power in my home country has nothing to do with any kind of culture, whether you call it imperialistic or not. Did Putin attack Ukraine because he read too many Russian books or listened a lot of Russian music? No, he did not. The only comforting thing I have to say in this regard is that all wars come to an end, and this one is no exception. Russian language and culture can stand up for themselves, so Tchaikovsky will remain Tchaikovsky, and Pushkin will remain Pushkin, and we too will remain who we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your absolutely fabulous personal speech.
Well, thank you.
And how wonderful to listen to somebody who can write. And that's so important to shape it, because it's so nuanced and it's so personal. If I may ask you a few questions, and then ask the two other members of the panel to join in. Reading your speech yesterday and today and listening to it, I think you're way too hard on yourself.
Well,
humility, yes, I do understand where you come from, but and then you say things like, well, it's up to the courage of the Ukrainians. Yes, absolutely. And to the Western Europeans who provide them with, I mean, we have nothing at stake. We have no risk in that respect personally. You, on the other hand, like you said, the mediocre man destroyed your life. For you, it's much, I think, because what you say in the end, I'm very impressed by that. The only comforting thing is, I have to say in this regard, is that all wars come to an end. And this one is no exception. Russian language and culture can stand up for themselves. So Tchaikovsky will remain Tchaikovsky and Pushkin will remain Pushkin. And we, too, will remain who we are. But that's beautiful, and it's true. And isn't it true that that in the moral sense, the survival of Russia is also in your hands because of the things you do?
Well, I don't take it that, I mean, my role too seriously, really. I'm grateful to you for what you are saying. But in fact, I think I just left Russia because of, as I said, of suffocation, of feeling of, you know, absence of air. And there is no merit in that. It's just you do what you do, you know, simple things that make sense. And then mediocre person come and destroys. I mean, but he was not alone, of course. And I admitted I made mistakes too. But of course, you know, each nation can be corrupted, unfortunately. Hannah Arendt said, when you know, after the war, she said, I am listening to many Germans who say that it's a shame to be Germans. And she said, what I want to tell them is, it's a shame to be human being. So let's consider that a shame of being human beings. You know, in opposite to what I saw on Billboard, you are not ashamed. This is something unspeakable.
Yeah, I understand. But like you say, it's not Russian culture. It's a gang of people who seized power who can rightly be called fascists.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, in my essay on immigration, which called Chilled, Cold, Ashamed, Relieved, I compare Putin to Smerdyakov, you know, a character of Dostoevsky, who really, you know, Ivan Karamazov is talking and, you know, and talking and talking, and he takes, you know, presse-papier and kills his father. So Putin is a kind of a person who has no culture, but he listened to someone who, I don't know who is that. It's Patriarch Kirill. Is it this philosopher, so-called philosopher Dugin? I have no idea. But clearly he, you know, like many Russian people, do not have tolerance against, you know, immunity against ideas. So, you know, he got this idea of Russian peace, which is, you know, wrong. I mean, this is by any standards. And then he starts to, you know, to do what he is doing. Yeah. So that is my vision of this of this situation.
And then you said something, I presume, very, very painful. Wishing defeat on the country where I was born and grew up is hard, but the alternative is much scarier.
Yeah, of course.
I think that must be somebody who lives in his language like you do and, you know, oozes its culture, which is one of the most nuanced cultures we do have in Europe, one of the more deeper and the more elaborate ones. That must be very difficult to write a sentence like that or to be in that situation.
Yes, it is. But I don't think that culture belongs to geographical place necessarily. If you look at recently, you know, died probably the best Russian poet of our days, Alexei Tsvetkov, who lived all his life, you know, in Prague, then in New York, then he died in Israel. My friend Sergei Ganlevsky, another brilliant poet, lives in Georgia. These days there are beautiful poets in New York. I can give many names. So it doesn't really belong to Moscow or St. Petersburg. So the culture, I'm not that much afraid about the culture, really. It would not be a defeat of the culture anyway.
No.
I want the defeat of Russian army, and I want, you know, the defeat of Putin. Yeah, that's very clear.
Now you said his name.
Yeah. Well,
because you carefully not use his name in your speech.
Well, because of disgust, yes. And it's, you know, we drank for him to die for so long, such a long time, you know, since Crimea, even earlier, that, and without any effect, as you can see.
Yeah, because words do matter. You call him the mediocre man who ruined everybody's lives. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's not my discovery. I mean, the mediocre man can destroy many lives.
No,
yeah.
That's right. Yeah, you can read Hannah Arendt for that as well. Yeah,
yeah, sure.
Yeah. At this point, I'd like to ask the other two guests we have tonight and to introduce them to you. Kirill Serebrennikov, I don't know where you're sitting, but... Thank you for being here. And one of Russia's foremost theater and film directors, winner of numerous international awards. Half a year ago, you staged here in Amsterdam at the Nationale Opera and Ballet. You staged a wonderful performance, Der Freischütz. But that's just, you know, one of the many things. But that's because it's around the corner that I mentioned it. And you had an awful amount of run-ins, to say the least, with the Moscow authorities and Russian authorities. You had to stay indoors for 20 months. You were sort of an inner immigration.
I call it my adventures.
You called it?
My adventures.
My adventures.
Yeah, it's adventures.
Yeah. And you decided to leave for Berlin after in March, actually, and you're living there now. Very warm welcome to you again.
Thank you for invitation.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Ivan Kolpakov, please come to the... One of the co-founders and momentarily editor-in-chief of Meduza. Welcome, Ivan. Meduza is the largest independent Russia media outlet we have left today, and you're broadcasting on the internet and using many forms of journalism from the Baltic states and now also from other places in Europe. You interviewed Zelensky. You're one of the few Russians to interview Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, among many other things. And you left, actually, Meduza left already when, a long time ago, 7 years ago, I think, when the Russian armies invaded Luhansk and the towns in eastern Ukraine already, because this war is much older than it seems, of course. We are very happy that you're here, of course, and very happy that you're here because you're replacing Galina Timchenko, who was supposed to be here, but is in the lucky circumstances to get one of the most important journalistic prizes right now, tonight, in another European city. So wonderful that you stepped in on the last moment.
Thank you. Sorry that I'm not a Galina.
Yeah.
I'll do my best.
I think most of us are sorry that we're not a woman, aren't we? Yeah. But anyhow, but we asked, and you brought it with me. We asked Galina Timchenko to say a few words to us, and I think we're able to watch them now and then continue with our conversation. Yeah, I think we are able to.
Dear, I hope you had a great time together discussing such important topics. And I wish I was there, but now I'm in Potsdam where I was awarded with this pre-Europe prize as a Journalist of the Year. I'm thrilled and honored, and I want to thank all the people who support independent journalism in Russia. I want to thank the mayor of City of the Real Freedom, Amsterdam, Femke Halsema, for her kind support of Russian journalists in exile. And I want to send all my love to my beloved colleague Ivan, to Kirill and to Maxim. Once Russia will be free. Thank you.
So what award did you and Meduza and she actually win?
This is a very important German prize, annual, and Galina is now actually in Potsdam. She is receiving this award, and she also, did this video. So actually, she can do everything at the same time.
Same time, yeah.
It wasn't that necessary for me to be here.
Congratulations with the prize, by the way. Once Russia will be free again, I think Maxim quoted Navalny as saying Russia will be happy again. Will it?
That's the happiest answer.
We had a performance in Gogol Center, Who is Happy in Russia, based on the Nekrasov's great poem. And the result, it's a question mark in the title, and the result of the conclusion of the poem of Nekrasov is really sad, but no one will be happy. But it's about the 19th century, probably in the century number 21, something will change. Let's hope.
Change is the first state of happiness.
Yeah. Let's do this.
Listening to let's start a little bit with Maxime's speech, wonderful speech. I'm listening to it, we've been listening to it. And I'm just wondering what your reactions might be to it. And especially, he started out by saying, Kirill, he said, I'm not a dissident, not even a political activist. How would you listen to that?
I think we have kind of painful connotation with the word dissident, right?
In Russian, it's not the same.
Discourse, let's say, it's quite painful because you kind of strange, lost person without home, without any connections, just something abandoned, something without any roots, and so on and so on. For instance, I don't take myself a dissident in full kind of size or full meaning of this word, because I don't work as a political activist, but I work in the theater, and theater filmmaking is also politics, let's say. And that's
a lot of people have forgotten that, but it is. Yes.
Yeah, it's a politics, and that's probably like I might write. I might call myself art dissident. It's better. I love this art in the beginning of this word.
Art dissident.
Yeah.
If you may, I would add some words here, because I mean, also dissident in Russian, it relates to a very particular, very certain and quite desperate movement that used to exist in the Soviet period. It was a movement of, first of all, human rights activists, right? In the Soviet Union, it's something impossible to imagine. So, I mean, in Russian
60s,
70s, the deepest, the darkest.
Andrei Sakharov.
Including Andrei Sakharov, and probably he was an icon of dissident movement, despite of his past and his actually work for the Soviet Union. So I would say that many people would be honored to be called dissidents. And it's not exactly the same as in English language. And when I'm thinking about myself, I live abroad for quite a while, so I get used to it, that people say, oh, this is a Russian dissident. And I think in many perspectives it's true, but I also have like a more complicated identity, because I'm working as a journalist, and being an independent journalist already means in Russia in many ways being a dissident. But for me it is very important to remain a journalist.
Like being an artist already is maybe
more or less.
More or less. Well, as with journalism, we see different,
Journalists maybe if a good journalist maybe always a dissident.
Probably, but of course, because it is always against the power, and it always shows what is hidden. But for us, as the biggest media institution left, not in this region, we are broadcasting in Russia, and we have the biggest audience in Russia, and still. But for us, it is super important to remain journalists. To maintain a certain journalistic standards. You can't become the head of a political movement. You are not allowed to do it as a journalist. As a citizen, I am probably a very dissident person, very oppositional. But in my profession, I'm trying to be as calm as possible, though it's really hard nowadays.
And continuing. Ivan, I would like to say that, I knew just a very important person whom I might call a real dissident. It's Vladimir Bukovsky, who was one of the most powerful and very important political dissident in former Soviet Union. And in comparison with his life, with what he did, how he kind of worked in political area in all this, we can't say that we are dissidents, of course, because it's not enough what we're doing.
Dissidents.
For for the artist, it's very important. Continuing on again, to be far from everything and to keep the position of somebody who observes the situation, and to not to stuck into the sometimes painful events or situation happening around you. You need this gap for work. Otherwise, you can't. You become I don't know, political observer, but not an artist. So I'm fighting for this space between me and the situation.
Mm-hmm. So if I understand you rightly, it's also a question of maybe respect to what happened in the Soviet era, that you would not call yourself, correct, which is difficult for a Dutchman to understand, of course, because we would look at you and think, that's the real thing.
It is also respect to contemporary dissidents as well. I mean, Alexei Navalny can be called...
They're sitting in the prisons.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we're here and just have a nice evening.
Yeah, and there were real saints among them, like Anatoly Marchenko, for example, or Ilya Gabay. You know, much earlier. As a child, I met some of them, and I met Anatoly Marchenko, and it was obvious he was. So it was like one cannot say I'm saint. No, I'm a prophet. Yeah. So it's almost like that. And in Russian language, you know, most poets would never say I am a poet. It's something you say I'm writing. You know, It's something that others may say about a person, that he's a poet. But saying in Russian "Я поэт," that really.
It's a fear to be marked with some label. Or
it sounds like Russian journalists and artists are too well educated, actually, being too modest. But a
lot of compliments. Okay.
I'm not very modest people.
But on the other hand, you have been living inside your apartment for 20 months. That is I mean. We've recently been locked up by our government because of for a week, the mayor adds. But I mean, a lot of people thought it was rather dire. But compared to 20 months, it's nothing. I mean, it is a real opposition. I mean, Maxim Ovčepaš said it's a fascist regime. You left your country years ago and have never been back in the last years. I mean, so I mean. That's opposition, isn't it? That's resistance. That's
it's our wish not to be inside the hate, not to be inside the war, not to be inside of something terrible. Probably it's kind of we try to protect ourselves from being destroyed and to become part of what we don't like. By the way.
There's always also, I mean, it's always hard to accept, like, when someone says, like, you're doing a very important thing, you are, you know, opposing to the authorities for so many years, but in fact, we all failed.
That's what Maxim
exactly says. Like, yeah, probably we do, you know, Kirill's and Maxim's work really matters, and Meduza is an important organization, but we are in the middle of catastrophe, and you know, it's really hard to, you know, objectively percept yourself in that kind of environment. So this is, you know, we are making jokes of you know, being modest, but this is probably not about being modest. This is probably about, you know, you just you can't. I mean, probably if you're Russian, you're so broken right now because a lot of people don't really get it. In Europe, a lot of people really get it. But also a lot of people don't get it. Ukraine is on the right side of history, and Ukraine will probably win sooner or later. We understand it. We understand that Russia and Putin actually lost this war before he even started it. Like even the idea of starting the war against Ukraine was already the beginning of the end for Putin, but also for our country. And like this is unnoticeable because, of course, Ukrainians are suffering the most right now. And we're talking about people who are dying, millions of people run away from the country. Like this is not the right time to talk about Russian problems, right? It seems like that. But also, like Russia is. I mean, Maxim is absolutely right. I think that was he was trying to express in his speech that, you know, the country is in agony, and in these circumstances, really, it's really hard to look at yourself and think, wow, what an amazing job you do.
I understand. That's very well said. That's amazing. I mean, yeah, you're right. Of course. You must be so broken now that everything you stand for. You already described it. We're losers. It didn't help. Do you feel the same?
Yes, I would love to say that. Look, it's a terrible period today. For all of us, because we are part of the war, we are part of terrible events happening around us. And I don't believe in collective responsibility, because collective responsibility means zero responsibility. I believe in the responsibility of each person to do something and to protect what he's doing, or people whom the person loves, from all these terrible things. I would love to. I'd love to say that it's important to protect Russian culture. For me, Russian culture always been the culture of the culture which fights against the regime. So, since 20th century, important kind of examples or part of Russian culture always confronted the state, confronted the power. I don't want to drop the names, but you probably know it's better than I. And today, it's the same. Our culture depends on the language. So culture is where we are.
Except for music, of course.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel myself the citizen of Russian culture. And it's quite important to feel this citizenship and feel this belonging to this huge and a very important part of world culture. And I don't want to feel it oppressed or destroyed or somehow. So my work here, my work now is to continue doing something, to help my friend, to help Ukrainians, to help people who are suffering under the bombing, who are suffering because of war, and not to give them, destroy ourselves. That's it.
Maxim said that it's a terrible thing to, that's actually, he hopes that Russia will be defeated and Putin will be defeated, of course. Because not being defeated is worse. Would you concur? Would you feel the same, or is it that?
I definitely feel that I want Vladimir Putin to be defeated, and I want Russia to be defeated in this war. But also, like it is a lot of, you feel a lot of pain.
Yourself? Yourself?
About like it's, of course you want Ukraine to win as quickly as possible, but a lot of people die from both sides.
Yeah.
As a Russian, as a human being, I feel sorry about both sides. And I think it is you can't replace it, right? It's just gonna be like, it's gonna be cut it out of, you know, of historical, I don't know, matter or something like this. The whole generation, the whole like half of population, eventually hundreds of people. So I mean, yes, you're waking up with this idea that you want Russia to be defeated, but also Russia is already defeated. Like your country is already defeated. This is really transcending feeling.
To start the war is suicide, in general. The person who starts the war committing suicide.
And by saying Russia, we want them, Ukraine to defeat, you know, Russia to be defeated. We don't mean that, I don't mean that I don't want Ukrainian soldiers to come to Moscow or to Tarusa. I want them to, you know, throw Russian troops away from Ukraine and make Russia to pay reparations and, you know, whatever is necessary. It's not that we want them to march to, you know, Red Square.
No.
Absolutely not.
No, of course. I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's an important difference.
And that's not their goal, as far as I understand. Yeah.
You interviewed Zelensky.
Yes,
not their goal.
well, it happened like 3 months after the full-scale invasion started. I don't think it would be possible right now.
It will be possible to interview him right now, you mean? Or?
I mean, for Russian journalists to interview Zelensky.
But then it was.
It was before Bucha.
Yeah,
and a lot of other
Bucha is where they discovered a lot of atrocities, massacres. Yeah.
Well, yeah, like it was a lot of points of no return. Like I feel it like the whole war is like every day it's the new point of no return. You think, well, this is the deepest, you know, point.
Yeah.
And then you go further.
Yeah.
So I was among other journalists. There were 4 of us, and we spoke to Zelensky, and it was before Bucha.
Yeah, yeah. But he addressed the Russian population through you, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the whole idea was to talk to Russians as directly as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
For you to understand, like the whole situation with Russian media. I think I was the only person that represented the media organization that still operates at the moment when we interviewed Zelensky. There were 4 of us. It was the editor-in-chief of TV Rain that stopped its operation for a period.
Yeah.
And the other, well, actually, there was one guy who's working for Kommersant, and they did not publish a thing. He interviewed Zelensky, he participated, and like this is a huge Russian newspaper that still stays in Moscow. That's why they didn't publish a thing. And so yeah, it's like it's a very I think it shows how media actually work. So they could collect only these people. Like they wanted to talk to, I think Zelensky himself wanted to address to Russian people, and there were no media to talk to. And it was the same day, I think, before the interview was actually published, the general prosecutor said that you shouldn't publish the interview. It was what is this word, like precautious from the general prosecutor not to Russian general prosecutor not to publish an interview. It made huge advertisement for the interview, of course.
Yeah, that's and but you were already a foreign agent at that moment. Declared a foreign agent.
It's not so hard to be a foreign agent in Russia. Yeah,
we talked about the word dissident, of course.
Yeah.
And maybe at closing of this part of the conversation, the word foreign agent.
Foreign agent is an ugly, word and also an ugly thing. And it reminds, if in Russian it sounds like the enemy of the nation, it really, transfers you instantly into 1930s.
It's a Stalinist word, actually, for
it's
labeling.
It's a Stalinist word, but also it is a discriminating...
It's a part of opposition with the West, so foreign. Everything foreign is very bad and suspicious. And now they have the law. I was told that if you know the foreign agent, you're almost a foreign agent. So I know you, Vanya. I'm coming to this award. Let's say.
So right. Now you know me. I'm on the board of Bellingcat and been declared a foreign agent.
Oh, it's terrible. Terrible.
So be careful. Yeah. So it's, but that's. I mean, that's part of the, because you're saying, and that's why I'm delving a little bit into the words. You're saying, yes, but in the Stalinist period in the Soviet Union, that was a whole different thing. But is it? Is it a whole different thing? Maxime?
Well, it is different, of course. It's different. In Stalin time, there was no way you could leave the country. And it was massive. The repressions were just massive and random.
Okay.
And
But let's take Khrushchev or Brezhnev.
Well, with Brezhnev, it was also different because at Brezhnev time, all Soviet people were good Soviet people, except very few, dissidents who were taken into prison, but all others were like, here when even official polls says that the war is supported or, Putin is supported by whatever, 60% of population. But what are other 40%? They are not represented at all, and they are not in prison. So who are they?
No, they call this 40% the rats.
Yeah.
So the rats, they're fleeing the ship.
Yeah.
They'll let them go. It's Matvienko who's the third person in the state saying like this.
Today she said that people who are criticizing Russia and run away from the country, they shouldn't come back. But I mean, Maxime pointed out very important thing. Like, of course, it's really hard. Historical parallels is a very tricky thing.
You're right.
And how can we compare contemporary Russia with Stalin's time when millions of people were killed? Russians, not only Russians, Ukrainians, and a lot of different nationalities.
Krim Tatarians and German-speaking Russians.
Yes,
whatever.
A lot of. But also, it's not. It is the regime that is not really supported by people. Like this is another thing. This is another thing that Putin wants you to believe. When the state-funded sociological agency publishes a survey that 80% of Russians support the annexation of Ukrainian territories in 2022. This is just not true. I don't even think about 60%. I don't even think about 50%. I think that, like, to be honest, nobody thinks about it. It's not in the agenda. And we are talking about very obvious thing, but there are a lot of more obscure topics, like the support of Vladimir Putin. Is it really huge or not? We don't know. Because the whole sociology comes from the authoritarian country. Whole sociology comes from sociological agencies that are funded or controlled by the state. Putin definitely wants you to think that he is supported by Russians. It's really easy to believe that, all Russians are the same and they all support Putin, because if they not support Putin, why didn't they actually destroy the regime throughout all those years,
and
right?
Why they go to war just without any response, without saying, no, we don't want to die, we don't want to kill other people. They're just going there
And why?
I have no idea.
Well,
Something
many
metaphysical.
people do not go. Many people go to Kazakhstan.
No, it's not
to
many.
Kyrgyzstan,
It's less. A few people. It's a minority. The total majority are going there supporting the regime. Probably we all of us were thinking that probably they're under huge kind of propaganda, influence of propaganda. I would be happy to think like this, but probably not. Who knows? I have no idea. For me, it's a kind of mystery and a huge, like black spot. I can't find the right answer. Why the people saying yes? I buy with my own money. I buy the clothes for the army. I take something, some stuff, some food from my house. With my own money, say bye-bye to my children, to my wife, and go to the war. How it's possible?
How it's possible? Yeah, it's very hard to understand. Yeah.
As Maxim said, and it was a quote, like every nation can be corrupted. That's just Russia. Well, Vladimir Putin has two very strong weapons. He has propaganda in one hand, and he has violence in the other hand. And also, he has a population. 80% of this population never actually traveled anywhere around the world.
80% have no passport.
They never
leave Russia.
Yeah.
Just compare, like, if you want to get the real. This is just one example that explains you a lot. Why Ukraine so differs from Russia. This is also a post-Soviet country, but Ukrainians could travel without visas in Europe.
Yeah, for the past 20 years, you mean?
For a long time.
Yeah, the Russians couldn't.
And they traveled intensively. And Russians, they just didn't go anywhere. I mean, okay, 80% they don't have passports, 20% traveled, 10% among them traveled to Turkey and Egypt. That's it. You can say any bullshit on TV and they will believe it.
Yeah,
I mean, these people are locked in the country. You need to see it like this is a very interesting. This is a very interesting phenomena. These people are literally locked in the country. They are not trying to escape because they can't even imagine how, like. We know that some Ukrainians are running to Russia. They had to run to Russia because this is like they know the language. They have relatives. It is easier to go to some place where you know someone. Russians, they just don't know anyone.
Yeah, and
it
plus,
makes sense.
And I would say, even in Tarusa, where I lived, a small town 130 kilometers from Moscow, they don't go to Moscow. They are so afraid of, I mean, all these cars, trams, whatever. People live where they live, and they live the way their grandparents and parents lived. So the idea that the war could be criminal, that the order could be criminal, it's relatively new idea, and it really appeared only after the Second World War, right? Yeah. Because their grandparents went to Finnish War, then they went to Second World War, then they went to war with Japan, then they, so this one, then Afghanistan, then it was Hungary, then Czechoslovakia, whatever. So they should learn that this war, Finnish War, was bad war. War with Germany was good war. No. I mean, they just fulfilled the orders. They got the order, they go.
But the lack of traveling is not the real kind of reason. It's probably one of the reasons, but not the main. I think poverty. They're poor. They trust the power. They really think that power knows better how to live, what to do. The power, they delegate the almost full of their lives to them, to the authority.
The responsibility is totally on their side.
Of course, it's kind of total infantilism.
Mm-hmm.
So there are big guys who know better what to do, how to live, where to go, how to start the war, to start it in general, not to start. And if they say, go, let's take the weapon. So they're protesting even, not against the war. They're protesting about the circumstances of the war, about they don't have the right weapon or camouflage or whatever. So it's not about this.
It makes it a little bit more understandable, absolutely, what you're saying. And it's important notions, I think. Thank you. I'm going to ask Maya Friedman again to, we're going to listen to her for a moment again. First, she played, we've listened to, I Think About Faith, which was a composition of yourself, which you made yourself. Not only a good performer, but also a good a composer. And now we're going to listen to a different piece written by somebody else.
Well, the composition I chose to play, it's called Medusa, and it's composed by Saskia Venegas. And the reason I chose it is because when I was first invited to this wonderful festival, I was asked to think about a composition that would reflect the subject of freedom. And actually, that composition, I was recording it on the night of the 24th of February. And Saskia and we were together. I was completely devastated by the news. I barely could focus on making music. And still we proceeded, and after the recording, we talked. And during the talk, I realized, with thanks to Saskia, that there is still something I can do. There is a way that I can exercise my freedom, and I can at least do something and maybe help some people. So I started to organize benefit concerts together with my wonderful Ukrainian and Russian colleagues, and brought people together, and I'm still doing that. So, Medusa by Saskia Venegas.
That's wonderful with music. You don't need a language. There's the language of music, of course, but that's enviable, isn't it?
Best ending. Yeah.
It's the best ending. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And it's we always end with asking the public whether they have questions. That's a good tradition here at the Bali. So that's what I'm going to do. Look into the audience and see whether there are people who have a question. And remember, a question is something, it's a sentence which at the end in Dutch and in English goes a little bit higher in tone and then has a question mark. I see a young gentleman over here.
Thanks. Can you hear me now?
It's good to speak in microphone because there's many people watching from home on the internet.
Sure,
yeah.
Sure. So one thing that I'm Russian as well. I've been living in the Netherlands for the last 5 years. And I'm also a doctor, a medical doctor as well. And I would like to thank you for, I think, accepting the voice of people from Russia, welcoming it. And second, I think I would like to comment on that. I really respect the work that every of the guests does. And but maybe one thing that I've learned from the Dutch, because we're Russians and I'm a child of Russian culture, we really like to go into words, into analyzing things, trying to understand them. But the Dutch, you guys really are good at being more pragmatic, at doing things. And I think we're really learning from you, and I've been learning for sure. But also being pragmatic is also maybe looking farther ahead. So what I'm wondering about is, now I think many people said that we failed. But in Russian we say the fight is lost, but the war isn't. So what do you think about the long-term outcomes? What do you think would happen in maybe 5, 10, but maybe not even farther, 20, 30 years?
That last one is a lot to ask, I would say. Nobody, I mean, has a glass globe. And I don't think one of us has, but still, it's a good question. You know,
it's a big question.
Yeah.
I think we all have to be focused on the war, and we have to do everything to stop it right now. Like, this is the most important perspective we can have. After that, something really bad will happen with Russia, and before that and during that. But before we'll start thinking, can we repair something? We need to stop the war, I guess.
Yeah, I agree.
Pragmatic, Dutch maybe.
Very pragmatic, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry for being so pragmatic.
No, don't worry.
I like the question, and I think the answer exists inside somewhere in your question already. I remember this novel by Ray Bradbury about the people, about the future where the people just burned the books. Mm-hmm. And the other people had to learn the books by heart to keep the knowledge of the mankind. Mm-hmm. So we probably should be like people like this. I mean, the Russians need to keep silence, need to work hard, need to do our best to keep something really important what we have, and not give them the chance or opportunity to destroy us.
We don't need to answer all of them, but I'm just looking at whether...
I need to say something.
Well, you don't need to. There's wonderful answers.
I am ex-colleague. We know that it's sometimes better to say to the patient, I don't know, than try to lie, because that's what medicine is about, about big lies all the time. But I will tell you, I don't know what will happen in 20 or 30 years. Russia very rarely had good periods in its history. Like, that was a good time, Well, Catherine the Great, what was, before French Revolution, not too bad. the period after Napoleon War, before 1825, you know, very short period. So most likely it would be something bad, but
Definitely.
yeah,
Most likely.
Yeah, but the most important thing is to stop the war.
yeah, absolutely.
Because if we're saying about the period of goodness for Russia, it was like a few moments without the wars.
Yeah.
And by the way, in the contemporary, the modern history, it was quite rare.
Yeah, between 91 and 93, it was a good, you know. Yeah, right.
60s,
yeah.
60s, some
60s.
period in
Days.
60s.
We need to talk about days.
A good day.
Good days in
A
Russian
good day,
history.
yeah. A good day in Russian history.
And it's gonna be. I hope that 20 years later, it's gonna be one happy day in Russian history. We know what will happen.
Now they're talking Russian, so if you don't understand...
Sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry, we try to calculate the dates of the month.
I thought another question. I think totally in the back. I think it's a gentleman in the dark with a jacket on.
Last week,
That's Jaap Scholte. He's a famous Dutch writer. Yeah.
last week in Kiev, they were pulling down the statues of Pushkin. What do you think about that?
Well, I have no objection against that. I mean, they in Kiev can do whatever they want, and well, personally, I of course cannot support this kind of things. But who I am to teach people in Kiev which statues, you know, to destroy, which not. I don't take this very seriously, to tell you the truth.
That's a great answer. Thank you. It's a wonderful answer, actually.
Yeah, because why Pushkin and why Kharkiv and why Odessa, why other cities were destroyed? I mean, and then on one hand and on the other hand, there is Pushkin statue, which is probably artistically not the greatest statue in the world.
Artistically, he's one of the greatest writers. Though.
Yeah. Yeah, but statue didn't change our attitude toward Pushkin, you know.
Yeah.
I think it was a week ago when Russia bombed Kiev intensively again. They actually also bombed an office center that is actually located on Pushkin, on Pushkin Street, like a street named after Pushkin. It still exists in Kiev, and I think. I mean, it actually frustrates me much more than the fact that, you know, somebody destroyed the monument of. It was actually not a large monument.
But look, the
bombing of the
It
Pushkin
has to be mentioned.
and the bombing of the Pushkin Street frustrates you more. That's
Much more,
yeah,
of course.
Yeah, I understand what you say.
the fight with the monuments is something very post-Soviet or Soviet. It's not, for me, it's not a good idea. I think, but at the same moment, they probably have to find any way to express what they feel, what they think. So they have complete chance to express what they want to say by this. So being under the bombs of the Russians, they can express it even in this way. But it's not good to fight with statues. It's not.
Actually, you're in very good company, because Vasily Grossman, in his little booklet, travels to Armenia. He tells the Armenians not to tear down the Stalin. And that's not of respect of Stalin, but because it's not a good idea to fight with your statues. Yeah, because...
Stalin, I would...
yeah.
I would do it personally. Lenin too, believe me.
No. I personally would, but he explains very eloquently why it's good to remember your history.
Today they can do whatever they want. First, let's stop the war, and then we decide which monument, in which place, what kind of form of the monument.
USSR is full of ugly monuments.
Yeah, that's true as well. That's actually, yeah. And maybe this one was a little ugly one. Another, I think there's a question over here, the lady here.
Yes, I would like to ask Mr. Osipov. Part in your speech, you say a war that has no justification, no prava, no pravitelstva, can't be won. The problem for the West has been that there is no rhyme or reason in this war. There is no logic for this war. And that's why it's been very hard to predict, and that's why we were sort of totally taken by surprise. The Germans first and we second. You are, the three of you, are all people of words and images. If you had access to your 80% in your village, who is complaining about not having the camouflage suits and the right sort of rifle, and you could give an emotional message, just one, because we have to repeat that one message about in this war there is no justification, what would it be? And how would you express it? And can you guide us in the West that if we communicate in any platform, in any way, on any level, you know, press, politics, whatever, business, what is the one message that will resonate, not with you guys, because you're convinced, but with your 80%, that touches that emotional part that we can't reach. Sorry, this sounds like a Heineken commercial, but I meant
actually, it's not Heineken, it's Grols. But other than that,
well,
thank you.
Okay. Look, first, it shouldn't be just one image. Because they work like 20 years. It's 20 years of propaganda, and now we see the result. So it's more or less what happened in Rwanda. Do you remember the radio of that thousand? Exactly. They every day they told people, kill other people, kill them every day, every second, every moment. Of course, it's huge brainwash. How to confront this? How to confront this with the image? First, it's a huge work to explain to the people that war is crime. To kill the other people is a crime. To kill the other people is the most terrible thing in the world. That's it. I have no other words to express what I feel. And images, I guess, images won't have any power to stop this. It should be years and years of work with the people who are under such terrible propaganda for more than 20 years. So it shouldn't be just like this. It should be a huge, long way from the darkness to somewhere similar to bright side of the existence.
Yeah, well, I have a cousin who is a supporter of Putin. I broke with him like maybe 8 years ago, I think. I tried to convince him with more than one image, believe me. And he is a kind of person who, I mean, he was a joyful, and he is probably a joyful man who loves anecdotes. He's not violent. He's older than me, like maybe, but he always liked, you know, respected. See, he read interviews with me, or you know, my stories. He collected everything. So we were in you know, very good relations. But I had to tell him at the end that if I ever miss you, I will turn on TV for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and that's it. You know, because it was what I listened from him. Propaganda is very, very professionally done and very powerful, really.
I think that's an important notion for Dutchmen. Propaganda is very, very powerful.
It's a poison.
And we,
it's a poison.
And we think it's not, but just remember a little bit, you know, what's happening to our society more recently. So it's a very important thing to say, especially for people who think that, you know, they all think reasonably.
And they don't hide things. They give you many, many versions immediately. So that the whole idea is that, you know, a person would watch it and say, well, there is no way we can understand what happened to Boeing, you know, in Donbass. You know, there are all experts, professors. You know, they give no, that's wrong. That was Ukrainian
MH17,
and they were dead from the beginning. They were all corpses. And the third said, you know, and
they confuse you.
Yeah, they confuse you.
And also, it is even worse because the goal of propaganda is not to provide you a certain version of truth. They just they destroy the concept of truth itself. You can easily manipulate people when you actually promoting the fact, the idea that everyone is bad, everybody lies. For example, Bucha. It didn't impress Russians because it was published in foreign media. Why would they believe foreign media? They don't believe anyone. And I'm a journalist, and I have a lot of experience of dealing with the large audiences, and I need to think about. I actually must ask this question myself every day, right? What can we do? What is the story that will make a change? There is no such story. If I would think like this way, I would probably commit a suicide 10 years ago when I was working as a journalist for 10 years. It does not work like that you are telling the truth to people in the newspaper or on the television, and crowds of people are running to the streets to, destroy the government. It doesn't work like that, especially in Russia, where propaganda is so sophisticated, where propaganda is not trying to convince you in something, when propaganda just tells you that you're doing everything right. You, what is the worst, also another very creepy thing about Russian propaganda? Russian propaganda says, you are very good.
Yeah. But do nothing, and do nothing.
Do nothing.
Yeah,
Doing nothing, you are really good. You can be, your apathy is wonderful.
Yeah.
And that's why nobody, that's why we don't see crowds of people in the streets. We don't see millions of people resisting the authorities.
And that's why vaccination failed, actually.
And vaccination.
Because do nothing, they were very good in...
They couldn't promote vaccination because to be vaccinated, you got to do something. You got to go and be vaccinated.
Yeah.
It didn't work, and they failed. Russia invented one of the first vaccines in the world and failed the vaccination.
Yeah,
it's probably the way out is to replace propaganda with a music. For instance, Tchaikovsky. Every day, 20 years, only Tchaikovsky, and they will probably understand there's something wrong.
I am on this wonderful idea. And we might even ask Maya Friedman to be part of that 20 years of state-induced music for the Russians and the millions. And maybe we can share a little bit of that music in Europe and the rest of Europe. I It's 10 o'clock. I'm closing this evening. I would have wished to have more people join in the conversation. I'm sure you might have a chance to talk to one of those wonderful guests on the with a beer or a glass of wine, maybe, if they're not going home and so tired. I have to thank you from the bottom of my heart, the four of you. I think it's truly amazing, and I feel ashamed, actually, to be sitting here as a Dutchman, asking you those questions, being in the comfortable position where we can judge and where we can. I really feel humbled by the openness and by the amazing amount of truth you've been talking and telling us, and I think we have to really take note of that. I think the concept of truth, like you just at the end said, and you so beautifully, as artists and journalists, convey to us, is very, very crucial. And this was an evening about speaking truth to power, but the concept of truth, I think, for a society which functions, is very, very important. So, again, for being so open and so willing to come and talk to you, I feel humbled.
Thank you very much.
Dank de burgemeester.